Well, you'd think because it'd been so long since we heard it that I would have come to miss Greg singing. Um, but there you have it. We're going to be talking about Room 39 today here on Mazecast. I don't know what episode number this is. I long lost track. But this has been an episode long in the coming. If you've watched these shows, we've mentioned Room 39 over and over again in two different contexts. One is a room having a really solid solution that we feel really good about and we really like. And two, as having complete disagreement over what the solution is with White Raven. I shouldn't say complete, but a fair amount of disagreement there. Andrew's going to be presenting on the room tonight. So I'll let him get it started and we'll see where this goes.
All right. So I'm going to just give us a recap of things that are confirmed and have also been discussed on the Abyss so far. So just to get out of the way, this is a room on the path. And of course, we have the R and O, the tire functioning as an O in the room. These give us letters for shoulders. So as for actual solutions, the correct door is 4. It pass back through 4 on the way out of the maze at this point. And so the real hot topic has always, of course, been the real Cask of Amontillado theme that's going on in this room, that being a short story by Edgar Allan Poe, of course. And we have several different visual elements that tie this together. First, the fact that it's a wine cellar. We have the jester's cap over the door that suggests Fortunato, the victim in the story. We have the trowel and the bricks, and the way that the door has been completely bricked up except for one hole remaining, which he leaves one hole open before he pushes the torch in, and then fills it in completely. And so we've tried to really we've played around with that a lot, and we've really bounced around a lot of ways of interpreting this that could systematically and predictably lead somebody to the answer 4, because it seems obvious that there's some kind of riddle going on there, and we've just been battling a little bit as to how to interpret what's there. And so the accepted solution by White Raven, and I'm just going to give this, and then you guys can jump in with other interpretations if you want while we just talk about the Amontillado stuff. The accepted solution is that we have a wine bottle that's pointing in the general direction of 11, the only wine bottle that's inverted in the row in the front. And we have a wine barrel that's leaning up against the door frame of 12, whereas we have a trowel pointing to 4. And the wine bottle and the wine barrel are both supposed to be evocative of Fortunato, the unhappy fool who meets his end here, whereas the trowel is supposed to be representative of his nemesis, Montresor, who not only kills him and shuts him up in there, but shuts him up in there first, but gets away with it. And I remember checking in the last lines of the story, he says that he got away with it and was never caught for 50 years up until the present day, as of the time of telling the story. So it seems that anything that we could identify with Montresor would be a good indicator of escape versus Fortunato being trapped. And so that's the line of thinking on the Abyss, is that the trowel is our Montresor indicator and our pointer to 4. So I did also have, on the subject of the Amontillado stuff, I also had a nice idea from Vince from way back on the Abyss, where he noticed in the text all of the bottles turned out to be empty, and read that as an indicator that he was building off of the wine bottle pointing to 11 and the barrel pointing to 12, thinking that if we want to interpret them as empty, we could see them as devoid of content, and therefore we should stick with the trowel, which is not empty, not necessarily full, but not empty either, and is our only remaining positive signifier 4. So do we want to talk about the Amontillado stuff anymore before I go on?
No.
I don't know if we're ever going to be able to get all the Amontillado stuff out of the way and then continue talking about the room. I think it's going to be part of anything we talk about.
That's true.
I would say, number one, what you just said about Montresor representing escape because he got away with the murder for all that time. That's not on the Abyss, is it? Did you just come up with that?
Maybe I just came up with that. Maybe I should post that on the Abyss. I just thought it was. I think it's just sort of taken as implied that Fortunato. We associate Fortunato with being trapped, so therefore we associate Montresor with escape. But it's worth mentioning that he didn't get caught.
Well, right. I mean, Montresor walks out alive and Fortunato's dead. I think that's clearly there, either explicitly stated or implied on there. But I hadn't thought of it from the angle of Montresor as having escaped punishment for his crimes, which is actually explicitly discussed in the short story. So I think that was an interesting addition to that. If I were going to use the line of thinking that's on there, I think you still have to take all the clues together. You've got the cask that points at 12, and you've got the bottle that points at 11, or a couple bottles pointing at 11, depending how you look at it. You would say the cask in the story, the cask was a lie. There was no cask of Amontillado. That was a lie used to trick Fortunato. And the bottle of wine that was given to Fortunato, Montresor gave it to him saying it was going to protect him from the cold and the damp, which was a lie. That was not the purpose of that. It was to further intoxicate him so he didn't realize what was going on. But the trowel that he presented, and when he presented it and claimed to be a Mason, he was speaking literally true. He was declaring his intent to lay bricks and maul him up. Of course, Fortunato had no idea what Montresor was talking about, but the trowel was not a trick. The trowel was essentially honest. And so I think I like that sort of association more than just saying the trowel goes with Montresor and the casks and the bottles go with Fortunato, because the casks and the bottles also go with Montresor. I mean, it was Montresor's wine that was given to Fortunato. Montresor, who claimed to have the cask of Amontillado. They were Montresor's catacombs that they were going through. So I can kind of see the logic. If you don't, it seems more appealing if you don't think about it out loud. I guess I can see the appeal of saying the trowel goes with Fortunato or goes with Montresor, everything else goes with Fortunato. But I don't know that makes too much sense when you really examine it. But I reread the short story before tonight, and it stood out to me how he was being dishonest both about the cask, and he was being dishonest when he gave him the wine. I think that's a reasonable way to interpret those three clues in the context of Cask of Amontillado and in the context of this room.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that's really cool. I didn't think of the two lie versus truth angle. I think that's very useful, and it seems very riddly.
Mm.
So do you want me to shelve that for the moment and go on to some of the other stuff?
Well, maybe we should maybe we should talk now about what then the counter interpretation is of that stuff. Or if you want to finish, I don't know, however you want to do it.
I don't have anything else that really ties into the Amontillado theme, so we could, if you want to keep following this up, let's just do it now.
Can I say something real quick?
Yes, please do.
I think if you were to, I think the Amontillado stuff is valid. I think if I were making this puzzle, which I wouldn't be making this puzzle, but if I were making this puzzle, I would make like parallel interpretation and try to work that in. So I'd try to make an interpretation where you would need to have access to this fiction, this Edgar Allan Poe fiction, in order to figure it out, but also have an interpretation where you could just look at what's there and work within the book in order to figure out the proper answer. And I think that's probably what Mason did as well. Manson.
There's another area of stuff that's been confirmed that I'll get to in a second that has nothing to do with the Amontillado stuff, if that satisfies you. It's all right there on the page.
Right. No, I think there are other interpretations. I'm just trying to say that, like, you don't have to go either or. Like, you don't have to think it's either the Amontillado interpretation or another interpretation. Because I think there are, like, kind of two dominant kinds of strains of thought on this room, and I don't think they're exclusive.
I think that's an excellent point, and I'm glad you made it because it's something that should have been said. There's nothing contradictory or inconsistent about those solutions existing at the same time. They build on the same observations and they lead to the same conclusion. It's just one of them has kind of a metaphorical interpretation based on Cask of Amontillado, and then the other one you can get from the book without having any idea what the Cask of Amontillado was. I think you're right. There's no reason to look at it as either or. One of this, either White Raven's right or either we're right. Somebody has to be wrong. I think you're probably right that what's great about this puzzle is that those layers of interpretation work. Maybe we should go ahead and give the other interpretation.
Yeah.
Let me pull up the screen share. So the other interpretation uses the same elements. I guess I should fix this. No, it'll be fine.
We're still on the Amontillado theme, just a different interpretation.
What's that?
We're still on the Amontillado theme, just a different interpretation. The same elements.
The same elements, but this is the interpretation that works without any reference to the story Cask of Amontillado.
Sure.
And what this makes reference to is the text, which we'll look at later, but where the text specifically divides the room into three categories. It says it looks like a wine room, it looks like there is work being done here, and it looks like a junk room. I think it says it looks like a combination wine and junk room, wine cellar and junk room. Someone had also been doing work here recently, something to that effect. And all the objects in the room actually fit into those three categories there. You've got the wine-related stuff, that's the bottles and the barrels. And then you've got all these objects that are seemingly random, although they also all seem to start with the letter T. You've got the tubes and the tire and the tree and the tag, and you've got it's a sign, but it's clearly suggestive that it's saying this way, but the part is sticking out through the door. All that T stuff seems to
table toy,
yeah,
as well, yeah, as
all that stuff seems to be the junk, and maybe it all starts with a T to relate to the word trash, or who knows, but that stuff all seems to be grouped together. And then you've got stuff that relates to the work that was being done. You've got the brick and the bag of cement per mortar, presumably, and you've got the trowel and this. So you've got these three categories of things. Now the wine stuff seems to point both at 12 and 11, because you've got the cask inclined back here that seems to incline up towards 12. You've got this one bottle pointing a different way on the rack that points towards 11, or the way I looked at it was bottle points towards these bottles that point up to 11, the actual number 11. Either way, you've got both bottles pointing towards 11 and not towards either of the others. So the wine cellar elements point to 11 and 12. And then the T elements also seem to point towards 11 and 12, in that you've got this tag around the bottle that points up to 11. I would suggest that the tag then is indicative of 11. I mean, if you don't like that, it's actually in front of the door to 11. So that works, I think. You've got the tree, which is actually partly over the door to 11. This white sign that's coming out from 11. And then you've got the stuff over here is less two-dimensionally suggestive, although it all seems to be in 3 dimensions pointing towards the door to 12. The toy there and tire rolling that way. This tube seems to be pointing up that way. And I'll note now, interesting here, or well done here, is that the R, of course, doesn't fit into any of those 3 categories, nor should it, because the R is there for a completely different reason, just to give you a letter for the riddle of the past, spelling out shoulder.
I'd be careful on that point, though, because if the R is not junk, why is the picture of a tree junk? Like a picture of a tree is not something you'd commonly think of as junk.
No, none of this stuff is, but it's something you think of as starting with a T because it's
So
a
the
tree.
T makes it trash, which makes it junk.
Well, you don't have to. It's the T that all groups in together. It's conspicuous that you've got all these things starting with T,
Uh-huh.
and then there are also the things that don't relate to the wine cellar or the work that's being done. So from the three categories we're given in the text, you can surmise that this is the junk.
Whether you wine, work, or things that start with T, not wine, work, junk. But junk leads to trash, which leads to the letter T.
Well, I'm suggesting that that's an interpretation, but I don't think it's necessary. Like you could not want to call it trash, but just say there are all these things that start with the same letter, and they're not part of the wine cellar or the work that's being done, so they must be the junk that's referred to in junk.
But if you want to tie it into the text, you have to think junk equals trash or trash equals junk.
No, I'm saying you can say this stuff is trash just by virtue of the fact that it's not part of the
It's not wine or work.
that it has to be part of that third category.
Mm-hmm.
But the R is outside that, which I'm saying is I think it's clever to tie in, like it could have been a bunch of random objects without any particular similarity that just didn't tie into a wine cellar or the work that was being done. And we could still say, well, it's got to be the junk that he's talking about because it doesn't fit any others. But by making them all start with the same letter, that makes R stick out as not quite fitting with the other pieces of trash. And it also does something interesting with the trowel then because, it makes the trowel seem to belong to a couple different categories because it does T, but then it's clearly part of the work that's being done. So it's easy to confuse it as being part of the junk group, but it's not. It's part of the work group. In the other hand, if you don't separate out the work that's being done from the wine cellar and you just look at this as cask of Amontillado stuff, the trowel fits in perfectly with the wine and the cask and the bottle and everything else. Yep. But if you divide it into the three categories, then the trowel is clearly in the work being done category.
Now, what about the ladder? How does the ladder fit in with this?
Well, the ladder doesn't. That's just because because you come down a ladder when you come from 12.
Uh-huh.
So as far as I know, I don't think that there's any that enters into the solution in any way, but certainly could in a way that I don't know of.
Yeah, you could.
Go ahead.
You could categorize it as a work object if you wanted to.
But then if it's a work object, interpretation, the work object shows the way. So if the ladder is also a work object, then it messes the whole thing up.
Well, it's a problem depending. It's a problem selecting what to leave out because you also have to. I mean, I really like your solution, and I remember seeing parts. I don't remember seeing it expressed so summarily as that and so well, but I remember seeing parts of it on the Abyss and really liking it. I do want to raise a couple of other points. In addition to the ladder, you also have the problem of the cap, which is just sort of left out.
The jester's cap, right?
Yeah, the jester's cap.
I was thinking that too.
And the other issue, and again, I just raised these for the sake of discussion because I do really like this interpretation. The other point I would raise is that you would want to be hesitant not to, like you drew the contrast with the R not being a piece of junk. Well, that's fine, but I think you also want to hold on to the tire. So that creates a bit of a tension between the tire being on the one hand going with the junk class. Now, on the other hand, I believe this is necessary as an O for shoulder, so you have to be careful not to throw that out.
Well, it's not necessary as an O from shoulder because we get an O from 23. See, that's a point of contention across all these rooms on the way back from 45 where we're picking up letters because there's no agreement, I don't think, from anyone about how we're supposed to get the exact letters. You can pick up some letters here and there, but
do you get the? Are you suggesting getting the O from the word nothing on the piece of paper there? And
from all three, and this is not my solution. This is from back on the John Bailey site, but I find it pretty sort of persuasive. What are the three?
Oh yeah, everything. Like enough. Okay.
Yeah. The time is o'clock.
Yeah, wait, that's really good. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's good work.
Then it works to remove it here, but that doesn't say anything about the jester's cap, which is something I was worried about too. If you don't have the cask of Amontillado in mind, and we're looking for a solution that doesn't require knowledge of that story, how do you omit that cap? Not that the cap necessarily points to anything, but
I think you're right. I think I overstated it to say that this requires no knowledge of the cask of Amontillado. I mean, I don't know that impairs the solution, other than that you would look at it and say, well, isn't it curious that this piece that doesn't fit in with the wine cellar or the work that's being done doesn't start with the letter T? What's that about?
but then it also doesn't point to anything. Like, I don't look at that.
I don't know that it impairs where the solution is going, but it becomes a curiosity.
Because you can't go in the bricked door. But yeah, I think also, and I think it's worthwhile to remember this. I don't think Manson meant for the book to be picked apart in the way that we do. I think you're supposed to kind of like semi-intuit the right way as you're solving. So you wouldn't necessarily have to think purely logically and have to account for everything. I think he meant for you to just kind of read it and look at it and kind of like work it out kind of slightly under the surface, which way is the right way to go.
Gregor, you're trying to undermine our entire enterprise, because I don't think I can agree with
I'm not trying to do anything. I'm just talking, which starts with those junk.
I think sometimes that seems to be the case, although I don't know whether that's just the times when we don't really know what's going on. But there are clearly other cases. I mean, the solution in room 1 is not just kind of feeling it out, seeing which way seems right. I mean, there's a fairly structured answer to say that the 4 words appear in text either directly or anagram. One does not, and he says the silence is, et cetera, et cetera. That's not this thing.
Yeah, I know. I see what you're saying. I'm just like White Raven, got an email from him once that said something along the line, or I'm interpreting that email to say what I'm saying to you. But I think you're right. I mean, he definitely did construct these puzzles, but I think there's kind of different degrees of concreteness to them. And this might be a case like that, where it's like, I don't think he's like as much of a stickler as we are necessarily for some of the elements.
I'll tell you, I don't think he would have any problem assuming knowledge of the cask of Amontillado for the room. So I think I was just overstating it way too much when I said you don't have to have any knowledge you don't have to know anything. You could be total illiterate ignoramus and look at this and figure out the answer. I think it probably does impair your ability to interpret the room if you don't associate that jester's cap with the cask of Amontillado and the wine and stuff together. Like, because that's what explains why.
I think you can still do it without it, though. I mean, you got wine and you got work. You got wine and you got work. Wine in the sentence is coupled with work or with junk, right?
I just said that you can. I'm just saying that it not knowing where that comes from would be a big confounding factor in trying to.
I think it's easier if you know the story, but if you don't, I think you can still figure it out.
Well, that's what I just said, and then you argued with me for 5 minutes.
Right, but now I'm arguing with you still. You get
it? Okay. Anyway, so the point, and I left out, I didn't start discussing the times table yet. Maybe we'll leave that till later because there's a lot of different stuff said about the times table.
Yeah.
But suffice it to say, it's a T object. It's been suggested that the 1 and 1 together maybe.
Oh, yeah. Don't steal my thunder.
All right, I won't say anything. Just the times table is there. And
the solutions, it's up there all the abyss.
Anyway,
the point is, the T stuff, the junk, seems to point at both 11 and 12. The wine stuff seems to point at both 11 and 12, but the work stuff points to 4. The trowel points to 4. and 4 is the correct answer. And there's some other things that, I mean, the bottles being empty, I do think could be suggestive of their lack of true meaning, or how about them being disingenuous, a fake prop or something like that. And one of the barrels that has the lid off and you can see inside that it's empty, although it might be a bit of a stretch to suggest from that all the barrels should be treated as empty. But, I mean, something was
the one tilted at that rakish angle. If you were a true workman, you would not be like so jaunty with your tilting as a barrel.
That tilt is probably not physically plausible unless there was just a small amount of very heavy liquid in the bottom, so that it could hold it up in that position. But if that were full of anything, it doesn't look like it's leaned far enough to stay leaned. It looks like it would just fall back down.
But it makes the leaning seem like definitely like it means something more than just like, this is how it makes sense to draw it.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. 14 to 12, it seems.
Yeah.
Seems pretty so.
Okay. So that was the counter proposal for, and I'll tell you what I think is most clearly correct and I think important about that is the division of the room into junk, wine cellar, work. But once you do that, it seems clear that the junk points both ways and the wine points both ways and the work points the right way. I think it all seems to follow once you do that. I think that's pretty solid. All right, that's all I had to say. Go for it.
I see. Andrew, go.
Okay, so the only other material that's been confirmed on the website is some stuff that is credited to myself and Hidden Mystery. Well, actually, several people. Ventile, Hidden Mystery. I think a lot of people. I think this is one of the solutions that everybody. Well, one of the points that everybody noticed, even if they didn't necessarily say, not to undercut anybody's achievement, was that the table of squares, setting aside the error and just reading it as a straightforward table of squares, that suggests 4 out of the 3 numbers because it's the only square number. So there was a bit of squabbling over the credit for that, but it seems it's sort of a public domain solution that both Gentile and Hidden Mystery have vouched, along with sort of implications elsewhere. But there's a lot more going on seemingly with the timetable, and I think you might, if you don't know this one, Greg, you might like it because it really is rather more intuitive, I would say, because it's not about procedurally arriving at an answer, but I noticed that the 1 times 1 equals 2, that carries both of the digits that together account for the 2 wrong rooms that we want to avoid. Generally got the sense that perhaps you're supposed to notice that error and be a little bit bothered by it and perhaps want to avoid 11 and 12 on account of that. And I don't know if anybody's actually said this, but I noticed this in reviewing for the episode. I don't know if we've talked a whole lot about all of that empty blank space that I guess I mentioned at one point, but I didn't do much with it, but all that empty blank space that seems to leave enough room for 11 times 11 equals 12, and that seems to have been omitted. And again, that seems to be there to get you thinking about the 2 numbers and wondering why it's wrong at the top and why it's missing at the bottom. And I think it's just there to create a general feeling of unease about those 2 digits and to steer you toward 4. And there's more to say about the timetable. Vince, you had your bit about the fact that the one occurrence of the digit 4 on the timetable is partially obscured by that tube, which I kind of like as being like 4 is the path to like this escape tunnel or something. But yes, that's right. There are different ways you could take that, but there's definitely, you do get a sense that the 4 is being singled out somehow by that tube. And go on.
Well, it's a problem we run into a lot, where we look at a room and we notice some weird stuff that definitely seems to involve some numbers, but then you can interpret it like 10 different ways to get to the answer you want.
Yeah.
So if we didn't know what the right door was here, we could say, well, look, we've got this multiplication table here. We've got 1 times 1, 3 times 3, 5, 7, 9, and a blank space. Well, what goes in the blank is obviously 11.
Yeah.
So that we should go to 11. Or, I mean, what is 11 times 11? It's
121, which is why I said you get the
right, which would have a 12 there. That's what I thought.
And that's very Manson. I think that 1 times 1 equals 2. Like what Andrew was saying, that kind of like, get this element here. It should make you uncomfortable. That he brings emotions into the puzzle. Okay, so like this thing, like that's why he uses darkness so much and just like kind of fear. You know, when you feel uneasy, that means that's probably the wrong answer. He brings that emotion into it. So the 1 times 1 equals 2, that's wrong. That makes you feel uneasy. So that's wrong. 1 and 1, 11, 1 and 2, 12. And then, you know, you have that blank space, which I've never noticed that before. That's pretty good.
It's pretty good, but I do agree with Vince's point that if you wanted the answer to be 11, you could get it from there.
But that goes back to the Gentiles thing where the first thing you get is wrong, but then the second thing you get is right. You know,
that's not always true. Like, because if you look at the times table and say it's a bunch of squares, it's 1 squared, 3 squared. So we're looking for a square. 4 is a square number. So
that's right. Oh, right. But it's not a bunch of squares because 1 times 1 doesn't equal 2.
Yeah, so you have to account for that.
It's not fully squares. You have to know your squares. That it's a little like extra knowledge that.
Well, for not only you have to know square numbers.
Yeah.
On its own.
Here's what I think about the times table. And it's something like guided by the fact that I really believe that all the trash is supposed to point at 11 and 12. So, well, number one, if something points at 2 different doors equally, then I think it's fair to say that's a clue you're going to disregard, except maybe in room 4, where who's telling you that there are 2 different doors you're going to have to take. But so, yeah, when there would be 11 times 11 is 121, and you've got 1 times 1 equals 2 at the top. I think that definitely would, you start thinking about there's an 11 and a 12 in 2 different places on here. And I think that blank space at the bottom is definitely there to make you think about what should go there. I mean, that's why it goes up by odd numbers, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, bam, 11. And I think that the 4 is covered up so that it's not also including a reference to 4. Like this is another, odd one in solution where the point is that the 4 is covered up, is not there. And the table is suggestive of 11 and 12. Yeah. But I mean, there is the problem that it is dealing with squares, and it's hard to think that Manson wouldn't think about the fact that 4 was a square. But then that's why he chose to only do odd numbers, so that again.
Yeah, there was discussion about that. Gentile suggested a rather pragmatic reason for only doing odd numbers. And then, I mean, there's also been discussion of odds and evens and stuff, but Gentile had a very pragmatic solution, which was just that he thought that including 2 times 2 equals 4 would make it too obvious, like it would be leaping out right out at you. But on the other hand, only omitting 2 times 2 equals 4 while including like everything else up to 11 times 11 would also be equally way too obvious. So that's why Gentile thought that he picked the slightly obscuring way of only focusing on half of the numbers so that it wouldn't be so obvious that 2 times 2 equals 4 was left out, so that unlocking the times table wouldn't just seem too easy, which I agree with. I think that's a pretty good, very pragmatic way of looking at why he made that choice.
Well, I think it's the times table is really elegant in that it like clues the solution in multiple ways with just this kind of very simple pattern, right? Got the simple pattern with 1 mistake and 1 omission, and as a result, it clues the correct answer like 3 or 4 different ways.
Yeah, and it's been suggested by White Raven that there are still like 3 or 4 other ways that he interprets it to give the room number. Who knows what those are?
It's been suggested by my mom that nothing, but if she did, she could come up with some stuff.
Yeah, I know you don't like it when we use the W word.
Well, no, I mentioned him as well. That's fine. I just think that like that's not gospel, you know.
No, I mean, the half of the point of what we said so far is that I disagree about his interpretation of the room. Or at least I would slightly tweak his interpretation in terms of why the trowel is correct in Cask of Amontillado terms. No, what I'm saying that, I mean, I don't think the times table was meant to clue the correct door in half a dozen different ways. I think it was probably intended to do it in one way. It's just, it's so susceptible to different interpretations that we can notice something weird about it and know what answer we're trying to get and find a lot of different explanations for it that are about equally valid.
Yeah.
And so I pointed out he had a bunch more. I'm whether they're going to be convincing or not, if we ever find out what they are, I don't know. But I presume they're at least somewhat similar to the solutions we've got so far relating to the time state.
Mm-hmm. Do you want me to move on from there? I think we've said
Yeah, move on.
Okay, so that's the extent of the stuff that's been, or at least, I mean, bits of what we've said so far were confirmed on the Abyss, but I mean, take that for what you will. But I like to use it as a measure. And so I'll move on to some things that have been things that are still in the unknown territory. There's been discussion about the number of bricks lying down in front of the door, which the brick's number 12, and Anchorperson Smith points out that you can get 12 from that by counting them straightforwardly, or you can get 11 from that by deducting the one that's going to have to be plugged in to fill the door. And that seems like another good kind of a clue where you have two numbers indicated, and so you just as Vince was just saying a couple minutes ago, you take that duality as a sign that you should ignore those two and instead focus on the one that isn't indicated. And White Raven raised a fair counterpoint, though, which was just a fair point of discussion, which is how do we know that we're really supposed to get both 11 and 12 out of that? And how do we know that it's not really just supposed to be a red herring solution for one of that? That if we knew about the story, we would understand we shouldn't.
I think Smith is more compelling in this case because it's drawn the way it is. So you definitely have 12 bricks there, right? Can't dispute that there's 12 there. Maybe you could like interpret certain lines differently, but I think most people would look at this and if they were to count it, they would count 12. There's definitely one that's separate from the others. There's definitely one space in the wall.
Yeah.
You know, and all of those things are deliberate. There's a reason for those things. So I think that the chances that he just accidentally got 12 bricks and accidentally put one separate as some weird red herring that also happened to be very relevant to the numbers that are important here, which are 11, 12, and 4, is a lot less likely than this is an intentional thing that you can use.
Yeah, well, obviously there was some level of intention, but I agree that it seems hard for Manson to imagine anybody only getting the number 12 or only getting the number 11 out of it when it's so easy once you see one to see the other one.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of shits on both interpretations of the room, though, because those are definitely work-related objects there, I think. That would be pointing at 11 and 12. And there are also objects that would be just as associated with Montresor as the trowel.
Yeah, you're right.
Then that doesn't mean that we ignore it just because it it kind of goes against our theory, but it's just something to think about.
Yeah.
Well, I think that goes back to like, there's not like when you can think about the room in multiple ways. And if you're thinking about it in one way, it doesn't mean that the elements that you use for that one way can't be used for thinking about it in another way. So the brick thing is just this kind of very like kind of micro way of getting at the solution. It doesn't use the whole room. You know, it's not as like full of a solution as the cask or the work wine junk solution. But I think that also doesn't make it invalid because it works.
And this is just cutting in with something new, which maybe isn't the best timing, but I remember, I don't want to forget about it. Something interesting. When I was reading the Cask of Amontillado before the show today, Poe tells you exactly how many lines of bricks there were over the entranceway to where Fortunato was bricked in, and there were 11 layers. And I read that like, oh, 11, that's great. So I go back to check the picture to see if that's what Manson did, and he did. There are a lot more than 11,
For sure. Probably at least twice as many.
which I guess the immediate reaction was, yeah, who cares? He didn't copy that stupid detail from the short story. It doesn't fucking matter. Except I kind of think he would have noticed it if he was basing this room on it, and maybe if he reread the story. But the reason why I think it maybe is interesting is because for that to have only had 11 layers on it, the bricks would have been a lot bigger.
Yeah.
And it would have been a lot more of a hassle for him to leave that many of them lying on the floor.
Right.
More like cinder blocks than bricks. So in talking about how it wasn't an accident that he left that many lying on the floor, it made me remember that about, if he had made the bricks the size that they were in the story, so that 11 layers covered up the doorway, then the bricks he had laying around would have been a lot more obtrusive visually. Like they would have taken up a lot more space.
Yeah. Have any of you seen the movie Young Guns 2?
I've not.
I've seen parts of it. It was a long time ago though.
Well, did anyone hear the Bon Jovi album that was inspired by the movie Young Guns 2?
No.
No, did that album come out before or after the publication of this one?
I think after. So the songs from the album were not used in the movie, but they were inspired by it.
Ever Dead or Alive, bro?
It's like maybe this room isn't kind of a similar thing. Like it's not really like the room where you have to have seen Young Guns 2, but it informed the creation of the room.
Yeah. There are a lot of other elements that make it clear this is not the room from the story of the Cask of Amontillado. It just doesn't match the description at all.
Well, should I move on?
Yeah.
So let's see. So you talked about your combination wine cellar and junk room stuff, so that's good. So let's get that. We did have just related to the whole junk thing and the tea items and the trash and everything. We did have a small observation from Wanderer, who I should have mentioned that Vince Gentile and Wanderer were really the people who put together the Amontillado. I like to give credit, but it's too soon. Those three, but Wanderer also has a little bit here where he notices that if you don't interpret the tea items as junk, perhaps if you're relaxing on the combination solution, but if you don't necessarily view them as junk, you can see them as actually, Vince, you mentioned that there's a bit of tension around the trowel with the fact that it begins with tea but isn't junk. And another very simple way of looking at it is simply that you have all these tea items pointing you to the trowel, or suggesting the trowel, which points to 4, which is tea, whereas there isn't really anything about the room that cues B, which you would need if you wanted the bottle and the barrel pointing to 11 and 12. So that's just a very simple...
Although there's a lot of stuff that starts with a B in the room too, because you got the vacuum boxes, the bricks, the barrels, the bottles.
Yeah, actually, I guess you're right. So I guess there is a fair amount of B as well if you wanted it. Yeah.
But this is one of several rooms in the maze where there is a repetition of objects that start with the same letter, and presumably they're not all used the same way, and we're not really sure what to do with most of them. Like in room 15, we need an H for shoulders, and it has a bunch of stuff that starts with H, so we say that's there to tell us to get the letter H. But on the same path, we've got this room with all those T's and all those B's, but we don't take those, for the riddle of the path. So I wonder whether it's hard to say whether there's something more telling you exactly how you should be using these, or if it's just that, well, it fits in this room, so we do it. It doesn't fit in this room, so we.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I've got another. Oh, this is a cool this is a cool observation from you, Vince. The text cues us to look at the labels by giving the phrase "dusting off some labels," and you notice that there are actually only 4 bottles in the row in the column around the center of the picture where you can definitively say that they have labels on. A lot of the other ones appear to have labels on at the first glance, but you can see that it's just a trick of light because there isn't a full border you would get from the sticker. So there's only one of them that's for the very, very front of the image, and then 3 that are much further back in the column where you can actually see that they have labels on. So that's an interesting way of getting 4.
Yeah, I think that's dumb though. I mean, it's interesting. Like, why is it that way? Why are there 4 unlabeled bottles and all that stuff? And you're right, it is mentioned in the text, dusting off the labels. But I don't know, these solutions where you just find something in the room and count it, especially with low numbers like 4, it seems like you're going to find your solution that way.
Yeah, I can see why. You want to push towards solutions in this room. This room seeming so cohesive, I can see why you want to push toward solutions that kind of tie everything together in this room.
Well, that's what's so beautiful about this room. And that's when we talk about 37 eventually, I feel the same way. And I don't know whether it's just hopeful thinking or what, but I really hope to find more solutions like that really tie the whole room together.
Yeah.
I think it's really neat when that happens.
So I have just a few more miscellaneous observations. We have one from Gentile that the inverted bottle in the column is the 4th one in. Since you notice that there's one you can just see the very rim of one toward the very frame. You count 3 and then you get the 4th. So another thing that Gentile has been really curious about is the tag, which if you just read it as tag, giving the letter T, okay, fine, it's part of the junk, but made much of the fact that it's blank, and it does seem to invite a question of why Manson chose to just leave the tag entirely blank on there, and Gentile has tried to put 4 in there as in it's for somebody, which I think is a bit of a reach. But I just want to know if there were any thoughts about the fact that it's a blank tag and what could have led to that decision.
Yeah, I don't really have any. I can't say I really thought. I mean, I read Gentile's thing before. I got the same feeling about it, but I haven't really given any thought to why it's blank, other than it's just there for it to be a T object relating to 11.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess perhaps the point of it being blank is to make sure you don't focus too much on the content and just focus on the word tag. So that's really. We also had some interesting stuff between you and Gentile. Just noticing what seemed like kind of a child schooling development theme going on in the right with the junk, with the toy bird and the times table and the big letter R. Not much there, but I thought it was worth mentioning. It was kind of interesting. That these might not be completely random objects in the junk category. And then we have, I just had, I'll finish with something from Gentile that I absolutely love and I wish were true, and maybe it is, because it's fantastic. But before that, I did also want to just ask, I was just noticing when I was reviewing this for the first time, do you make anything of the fact that, yes, you presume that the sign says this way, but you actually only have the letters SWAY. You make anything of the resulting word sway? I don't think anybody's ever talked about that on you.
I've thought about it and come up with nothing. So I've got nothing on that one.
Yeah, it just seems like an interesting.
But Alex does. This is the one thing that Alex wanted us to mention, not the word sway in particular. But here, let me I'll put the focus on me, and let me see if I can do this in a just fucking do. Okay, here we go. So take a good look at this sign here. Look at the font on there. Look at the size of it. Look at the way it's sticking through the doorway there. And then we're going to take a trip down to room 45.
Yeah!
Oh, whoa! Bonus, we're actually also covering room 45 tonight.
And look at what we've got here, sticking out a door in the same location, similar size sign. The writing's not fully spot on in terms of font, and it's got ELVI. The other one starts with an S space. So it looks like it's spelling out Elvis between those two signs.
Oh my God.
Elvis Way.
Elvis Way. I don't know what that means, but then
That's a street in Reno.
is it really?
Yeah.
I figured there'd be an Elvis Way somewhere. I Googled it earlier today, but it didn't get any results like that. But
Well, you got to use Google Maps.
okay. Here's another funny thing that it's kind of another, well, I wish this were true. And this is maybe closer to plausible than some of the other ones. If you put these signs together, you come to 45 first before you go to 39 along the path. So you see the LV and then you see the sway there. And so you see it and you're leaving the building and you get Elvis. Oh,
That's left the building. But that's not the Elvis's, like, that's not the way you would leave the building. That's the problem.
what do you mean it's not the way you would leave the building?
Part of the path out.
Yeah, you would go through 11. I don't know if you go.
No,
Yeah.
no, not through 11, 39.
No, but I mean, Greg has a fair point. Like, you would assume that if there were anything intentional there at all, you would assume that 11 was the right way to go.
Yeah.
Wait,
Left the building.
So if it's Elvis's.
saying you would expect the sign then to point the right way.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't.
Leaving the building. I guess Elvis leaving the building is Elvis dying, right? So,
No.
then, yeah, like 11 takes you to the trap, doesn't it?
Yeah, 11's in the trap.
So, yeah, the trap is death.
But that's not what Elvis leaving the building means.
That is what Elvis leaving the building means.
No,
And Elvis left the building when he died.
they would say Elvis left the building when he left buildings.
And they also said it when he died.
Okay. I guess for some reason it didn't really occur to me that the signs should be pointing the right way to make a message together. And I still don't.
Die, Vince. We're going to speak of your soul leaving your body as Vince has left the building.
I understand what you're saying. That's fine. I'm saying I don't see that as necessary for these two signs in two different rooms to be making a message together. I don't see it as necessary that they also be pointing through the correct doors.
Messages, the purpose of messages is to get something across. If the message is just kind of saying something that doesn't matter, it's not really a message.
No, it's relating to the fact that you're on the path out.
You're not on the path out if you're going to room 11, unless you're
No,
on the path
not
out.
about the doorway. It's just about the rooms.
But why would they put it in a doorway if it has nothing to do with the doorway?
Well, it does have something to do with the doorway independent of this sign. Like if you forget about room 45, that sign makes sense in the context of room 39 because it's suggestive that it says this way and it's a T thing and it's pointing you the wrong way. But if you point the signs together, it's suggestive of Elvis Way. Which makes you think of Elvis Lee.
Which is by 11.
Confident.
No, because you don't go through 28 either. It's not about going through the particular doors. And look, here's another thing. When Manson wrote out his clues for room 45, telling people what the answer was essentially, because no one on Earth would ever figure it out. His clue relating to that sign was there are no two ways to read this sign. Ways? Two ways?
Oh my God.
And the other.
Oh, I'm sold.
All right.
No, I like what you're saying, Vince, but I think where you go wrong is by saying that it has nothing to do with doorways.
But it can't have anything to do with the doorway.
If it has to, I think it has to do with the doorways, and it means that, if you leave the building like Elvis does, you're dead. You choked on some peanut butter banana sandwich, and
Well, in any case,
why is that crazier than what you're saying?
I think it's real interesting.
Well, I wish I had ended on that because that's the real grand finale. But I did have one more thing, which is from Gentile. which I loved. It's been noticed by a couple people that the hammering and chopping sounds are suggestive of the adjacent room 4, where we have the axe and the gavel. But Gentile also pointed out that in the story, the Cask of Amontillado, Montresor leaves only the last brick open, pushes the torch that he brought with him in for Fortunato so that he'll asphyxiate, and then finally pushes the last brick in. And Gentile pointed out that in 4, you have chopped wood, you have matches, and you have a candle, all of which could be combined to generate a torch. And so Gentile suggests that Montresor has, and he says that because of the faint jingling, Fortunato is still alive at this point. So Montresor has stolen out to room 4 to go get those flammable materials and push them into the brick hole. And so we should go to room 4, which I love. There's no way that it was intentional, but I just love it. I think it's really
I think it's intentional, not as a solution, but as just something really fun.
Perhaps.
I think that, like, if you've like gone into this, if you're making a room based on this story, like if you're Bon Jovi and you're really into Young Guns too, you're not necessarily making all your songs directly related to Young Guns 2, but you've watched the movie enough times that kind of thing is going to be in your mind and be like, okay, this is really fun. We're going to have these elements that work for room 4, which all those things do, like the light and the wood, or the matches and the wood and whatnot, but also have them work to make a torch. And that kind of,
you don't really use,
is what makes this exciting.
You wouldn't really use a log to make a torch, would you? I mean, that's not really how they make torch.
Chop it up.
Chop some of it off.
Yeah.
Well, you'd have to. You couldn't do it with just an axe because they're. I mean, you could, I guess, if you were really an expert work, but that's not what they do because they make like thin, more like a pole than a.
What Middle Ages tool would you use to make a torch?
I don't know what they used in the Middle Ages.
Well, that's when you use torches. You don't use torches. Like these days, the British, they call torches flashlights, and you don't use wood for that at all. But that's not what they used in the Cask of Amontillado. They used like a torch with a stick. That was
a stick, not a log.
But it's not like it's just a stick.
One just pushes the candle in there. It's metaphorically a torch.
Like you can't use any stick. You need like a stick that's prepared to be a torch. It needs to be like
accepting that this is supposed to be ancient building materials, then you wouldn't have the matches in there, right? I mean, that's fairly recent.
Well, Montresor goes in there. He doesn't know what the fucking matchbook is, so he uses what he recognizes.
You know, there are like actual lights that shape like torches on the wall in 4.
Yeah.
Whoa, interesting. And yeah, basically tying all this together is the fact that if you're on the path, you've already been to 4, therefore you actually are free to use, like, it's fair game to suggest that you might want to use knowledge of the contents of the room 4 because you've been there. And yeah, I just think it's fun. I think it's a really fun movie.
I think that's great. And I agree with you, Andrew. I also love David.
Yes.
All right. Do you want to go through the text here?
Yeah, why don't you read it, Greg?
Okay. Ellipse. But look like a combination wine cellar and junk room. Does anyone have a comment on that?
I was going to wait till you said the next sentence.
Okay. Someone had been working here as well.
All right. So that gives us our 3-way separation, our 3 categories for things in the room.
Yes. And I think there's a fair thing, like, you know, the opening sentence and the ending sentence both kind of have like a particular potency in a lot of these rooms. The opening sentence, I think, can kind of set the stage for how you're supposed to interpret the pictures. And the ending sentence oftentimes gives you kind of like a cheap way out. This is more to my taste, said one, dusting off some labels. All the bottles turned out to be empty.
No, we already talked about the dusting off some labels, about how 4 rack, and there are 4 unlabeled bottles off to the side. All the bottles turning out to be empty. We talked about how that could be suggestive of the bottles being, deceptive or fraudulent or devoid of meaning. emptiness is not suggestive of, I guess, something you'd have confidence in. I don't know what this is more to my taste is about.
Well, it's about wine, and taste starts with T. So the wine is
Taste starts to I like that more than I think you thought I would.
well, no, that's what I thought it was. I was just saying what I thought, but I didn't. Yeah, I didn't think.
I find that weird because
I definitely assume you're not going to like anything. So anytime you like something, you like it more than I thought you would.
I find that weird because it confuses the category of wine and junk. I mean, I think you're right. I think you were saying, well, it's just because it's wine, but I think you're right. I feel like sometimes he just chooses. Sometimes in the text, if he has an open space, he'll just choose. He'll work in some flavorful word that relates in some way to the aspects of the room, but isn't necessarily supposed to be like clue, but just like. Maybe I'm just biased because coming off of Practical Alchemist, this is what all of the text in Practical Alchemist was just those kinds of thematically flavorful choices.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think you stated it very well. And that's something I don't think we've ever brought up or talked about before, but I think you're exactly right. And some of the times when we struggle over, what is he saying? What does this mean? How do we interpret this? I think a lot of times the answer is you don't. You put a word in the text that seems to point towards something in the picture to drive you crazy.
Yeah, there's a degree of intentionality, but just a sort of general resonance, not necessarily, okay, this is pointing you in the direction that this will go.
Yeah. No, I agree with what Andrew's saying, but I also think that how I interpreted Vince's interpretation of the room is that the wine is supposed to be junk in a way. Well, you phrased it in terms of three categories, but the wine is next to the junk in the initial sentence. So, and this is just kind of a reiteration of that the wine is junk. Wine is trash. Starts with T.
Yeah, I think that's a great interpretation of that. Instead of associating the wine with the letter T, all those, and then it's a combination wine cellar and junk room. But if all the bottles are empty, aren't they essentially junk?
Yeah, they're junk, and the fact, and just in like how they separated wine cellar and junk room in one sentence, and then someone has been working here as well. That's something different.
Yeah,
that's all this room is being used for. It's not combined with the other things. It's like that's one thing, and then the work is another thing.
It is a little odd that he says this as if he's comparing it to something else.
Right. What's the thing that they're trying to sell him on? I guess the work. The work is what immediately preceded to it.
Yeah,
he did it.
This is more to my taste than wet cement.
Well, this is supposed to be interpreted based on which room you exited.
Oh,
yeah, it's sort of which on the path. Which room are we supposed to?
We just came from 12.
We just came from 12.
So that's one of the copy rooms, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, there's not a whole lot to say about it.
There is a reading picture in that room.
Yeah. Why do you?
But I think I see what Andrew means. I think that makes sense. He's talking about the room in general because it has the wine in it. Not saying that this wine in particular is more to my taste than something else.
No, I didn't think of that. I didn't think of that.
This room is more to my taste. So it's a comparison with wherever they just came from or whatever rooms they've been through, not to some other thing drinking.
I've sort of always interpreted that way. I didn't realize, it never occurred to me that you could interpret that as being this particular bottle of wine is.
Well, I think that just strengthens the plausibility of that reading. If it made so much sense to you that you didn't even think. I think that's probably what's going on there.
I hear some hammering, said one. No, that's a chopping sound, said another. So that's all kind of floor stuff. Is kind of what.
Yeah.
But
you can't refute that.
Not always, but
that's all has to go to floor, which because we've already been there on the way in. We know that there's hammering and chopping going on in it.
Yeah. None of them heard the faint jingling that came from behind the wall. I don't hear anything, I said loudly, and with as much commotion as possible, hurried them out of the room too.
And of course, that's just reinforcing the Cask of Amontillado stuff. From outside of a puzzle perspective, but just in terms of the tone of the book and the nature of the narrator, this is a really important room, I think, for just establishing how sinister of a character he is. It sets a good tone, I think.
Well, I think there's also something to the room about this. So, so they're talking about the hammering and the chopping sound. Those are both sounds of work. So they apply directly to room 4, but they also apply to the work junk kind of dichotomy that you establish. Hammering and chopping sounds are both sounds of work. Jingling is the sound of frivolity. Don't come in front of the camera because you're naked and this is going on. But jingling is a frivolous sound. Okay, so it's a junk sound in terms of utility. Jingling doesn't accomplish anything. It's not like hammering. Hammering is the byproduct of work. Chopping is the byproduct of work. Jingling is the sound of frivolity and junk, in a way, kind of like a. So I think there's more to it than just that.
So you just defend the theme. When you said that, I'd only ever thought about his comment, "I don't hear anything," in reference to the jingling that came from behind the wall, where he's trying to talk loudly so that they're not interested in the person that he has locked up behind the wall in this room. But it comes right after them saying, "I hear hammering, I hear chopping," he hears the jingling, and he says, "I don't hear anything," and tries to rush him out. So that's an important point, because we know when the guide is trying to distract them from something, that it generally means he's trying to distract them from proper clue, right?
Yeah.
From something. And he's not just taking them away from the jingling, but he's sort of denying that there's any hammering or chopping going on, which reinforces, not just that they're hearing sounds from 4, but that they want to go towards 4.
But he also could be seen as benevolent there. If he's trying to distract them from jingling and keep them thinking about the hammering and the chopping, then he's actually being benevolent there.
I don't think that's a very plausible reading, though. When they say he says that loudly, it makes as much commotion as possible. I don't think he's trying to.
Reminiscent of room 29, which numerically is similar to 39. Or no, 26. Sorry, not 29.
That's still pretty numerically similar to 39.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. But that's where he also distracts them with sound and pushes them out of the room. He does the same thing there.
That's true. And that's a room where not that they hear anything that's important, but where the silence isn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what they're hearing is important.
Yeah, and he's trying to cover it up.
Yep.
I like it. Boy, this room seems so well.
Yeah, it's
connected.
A rich room.
It's really connected, like you said. That works. It's a very whole room. Like it's like a full meal of a room where like all the different courses and all the different things that are on your plate seem to be part of one meal, as opposed to like a lot of delicious things just kind of thrown together on a cafeteria tray.
Yeah, it was definitely more to my taste.
You should cut it there. That's where you want to stop it.
Oh, sorry, too late.
Okay. Say that again, Andrew.
This room is definitely more to my taste. Waka waka shmaka.